Happy Friday to everyone, and welcome to Get in the Herd After Hours. I'm your host, Alex Bond. I am a person in recovery from substance use disorder. What that means to me is I've not found the need to put any mood or mind-altering substances in my body for just going on over 10 months now. I am a peer leader and recovery coach at the McShin Foundation, as well as a house leader there. And I am reporting live from Roanoke, Virginia tonight. As you can see, my brother's in the background. I'm at mom and dad's house right now. I got Bill and Johnny on today. We got a really cool show lined up. Bill, why don't you introduce yourself?
My name is Bill Stauffer. I'm also a person in long-term recovery. I actually call myself a formerly young person still in recovery. I've been in recovery since age 21. Got help from publicly funded treatment, got involved in the service system, have spent over 3 decades doing this work. Currently, I run the statewide recovery community organization of Pennsylvania, and I'm honored to be involved in the recovery movement and on your show today. I'm really looking forward to it.
We're happy to have you. Johnny, how's it going? Why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm John Fabizeski. I'm a person in long-term recovery, and what that means to me is that I haven't put a mind or mood-altering substance in my body since January 26, 2014. And directly because of my recovery, I'm able first and foremost to be a husband to my wife, a father to my children, and a grandfather to my 4 grandchildren. Yes, Johnny Fab is that old. I'm now a responsible and productive member of my community. And I am a certified recovery specialist for a collegiate recovery program called the All One Recovery Educational Institute. And I am a state lead for the Pennsylvania Recovery Advocacy Project.
Good stuff. What portfolios and resumes we got on you guys. So Bill, I wanted to ask just to give our audience a little bit of a background on. You said you got clean at 21 from publicly funded. What does that mean exactly? How did that happen? Just like the quick and breezy.
You know, it's interesting. Here in Pennsylvania, we had some publicly funded treatment in the 80s, and I think that's to the credit of people in the 60s and 70s who advocated for it. When I know I needed help, I walked into a publicly funded treatment center, which was staffed by people in recovery. Looks a whole lot like what recovery services look like now. And the whole service system changed, and we could talk about that. But people helped me get better, and I decided this is what I wanted to do with my life. So I spent 3 decades doing it. And having access to care, long-term, good quality care, and then long-term support is what our communities need. And I got it, and I want it there for other people. When I got at age 21, there wasn't anybody in my age group really in recovery. And it's great to see that there are younger and younger people getting in recovery, but we want to have recovery available to everyone. And that's a central focus of our mission, diversity. So we want young, old, black, white, brown, whatever. We want access to care for everybody, and that's what we're about.
Yeah, age, race, creed, color, sexual identity, all that good stuff. I mean, it sounds like in your situation, it's a combination of luck and fortune, being at the right place at the right time. Because back in the '80s, stuff like that didn't really exist as often as it does nowadays, and not even as often or as frequent as we would like to have them around still. So that is pretty good.
Here in PA, it's because we had some really strong advocates who made sure that it was available. And some of those advocates became my mentors, really. And so we have a good tradition of having care available, and it's eroded at times, but it's an important tradition. And I think that history is really important in the recovery. We have to understand where we came from to understand where we're going.
Yeah, absolutely. Johnny, what was is your story similar? Did you have state-funded treatment to get into recovery, or kind of a little bit different on your end?
Yeah, just a little bit different. January 26, 2014 was the last night of my run. That was a night where I attempted to end my life, but woke up alive in a jail cell. And for the next 5 months, I would stay there until accepted into a diversion program, treatment court. And then I went to treatment, 5 months in incarcerated, and then to a treatment center, and then back home, and 2 years on a treatment court program. And that was kind of the get-go. From there, I became a recovery specialist and went back to college. So it was, again, you could say publicly funded treatment because it was paid for by the state. Absolutely. But our stories are not that dissimilar, but similar.
Yeah, I mean, I was in jail before I got into recovery. It was kind of like my wake-up call. I mean, I'd known about my addiction history since I was 18, and then didn't really decide to take the reins on it until I was forced to. And now I'm happy that I did. So it's kind of like a whatever gets you in the door type of scenario. Bill, I wanted to ask, so both of you guys do a lot of advocacy work. And to those who don't know what that is, what does that mean? And what do you advocate for specifically?
Well, let me just say, one of the reasons I mentioned publicly funded treatment is, the reality is that helping me with tax dollars get into treatment was the cheapest thing that society could ever do.
Boom.
Because I was going to cost everybody a whole lot more. And instead of costing the system more, I became productive. I teach at a college, I'm employed, I pay taxes, I'm a good citizen. And the only thing that's remarkable about my story, it's unremarkable in the recovery community. So things that we advocate for, and I want to talk about tonight, one of the things is the 5-year recovery paradigm. That we know that when people hit 5 years of recovery, in general, they stay in recovery at a rate of 85% for the rest of their life. So advocating for that is making sure that everybody understands that what is failing is the way that we provide care and support for people. It's not people failing. In America today, that we know NIDA says that the minimum dose of effective care for anybody, the average dose, is 90 days. Most people get a fraction of that, and then we say they fail. 90 days is the minimum dose of effectiveness. And so what we envision is a care system that's being developed across the country in fragments of treatment and recovery support services that extend for a period of time and just to help sustain recovery. It's actually, we can turn, you got me started on this, but addiction is our biggest public health problem. I mean, we know the current administration, federal administration, identifies that the opioid use epidemic is costing the GDP around 3%. Alcohol is killing more people and more expensive than opioids. When you combine all the addiction stuff together, this is our largest public health problem. I mean, pre-COVID, but the long-term problem. And on the other side of that, here we have a problem that we can take our. Sorry about my dogs. I can't do anything about that. If we can take our largest public health problem and turn it into our biggest asset, people in recovery who take care of their families and communities.
Yeah, that's absolutely spot on. And then all the money that could be taxpayer money that could be saved when recidivism rates are lowered once people find that publicly funded treatment. Johnny, have you gone to jail since that time that you went and got clean?
No, sir, I have not. I have gone into the jails to speak in the prison system. I think the first time that opportunity was provided to me was surreal. I remember going in and the doors closing behind me and having that hopeless feeling that I was back there again. It really goes to say how much that traumatized me. Hey, it was a county jail, and hey, some people will say, well, that's not trauma, man. You got to be to prison. Listen, man, it was traumatic. It was traumatic for me. When I left there after that meeting, I had such a feeling of hope. And when the door closed behind me, I broke down in tears because I was able to walk out of there. And you had asked the question, what is advocacy? For me, it is. Advocacy is somebody should do something about that. You are someone, do something. I'm tired of looking at things and seeing no action happening. And I think we'll get into this conversation a little bit later, but I so much push for the fact that we need to think and act locally rather than as a movement trying to make these humongous policy changes and changing the way we do things. I mean, I'm not capable of that yet. I don't have the intelligence to do so. There are people that are far better educated that know how to change these laws and do things. I'm pursuing my bachelor's degree. I want to have a master's in policy so I know what I'm talking about. But I know that when I act locally and working with Pro-A and the Pennsylvania Recovery Advocacy Project, that is their mindset, is not to have these recovery rock stars. I think Bill White just wrote a paper about this a little bit ago, and it's like we elevate people in the recovery movement in these platforms, and we try to take things that happen locally and wrap it up in bows and make it work nationally. When what I know here in Northeast Pennsylvania, I'm not going to come down to Roanoke and say, hey, this is how you should do things, because it don't work that way. What we do in our communities is what we really, really impacts things. What works in Northeast isn't going to work in Roanoke. And I don't know shit about Roanoke. I know everything about Northeast Pennsylvania. And if we can continue to do that, I'm getting off in a rant here, so please, if I go too far.
Go to town. I just want to say that what you're saying is completely valid. It doesn't make sense to try to start from the top down. It makes sense to start locally and then go up once everything starts working successfully. Yeah, go to town, Johnny.
When I came into recovery, I had the privilege. Of being exposed to people like Greg Williams, being exposed to people like Bill Stauffer, being exposed to John Shinholster. By a matter of fact, I met him at the base of the National Monument on the National Mall for Unite to Face Addiction. And he was just, to me, I was like, I'm seeing him from the anonymous people, and it's like, I'm meeting this rock star, John Shinholster. Like, wow, he's a rock star. This guy's in movies. He's the most humblest, down-to-earth person I ever met in my life. Would give you the shirt off his back. And those are the kind of people like Tom Hill and others that I kind of saw as mentors. And they had the same sort of ideology as doing things in a community base and changing things in our own community. Bill, bringing the state together through Pro-A and bringing all the things together to share those ideas across the state. The last 14 weeks or 15, might be more, Bill, since we've started. Bill's running a meeting that we meet once a week from all across the state, and we share what we're doing through COVID. We talked about hope, purpose, and community maybe being something we wanted to talk about this evening, and that those ideologies were taught to me from the very get-go in recovery, that it was take care of your area. And if we had more people that acted that way in the recovery movement, if we had people that didn't try to become so elevated and were stewards of recovery, I think that's Bill's word, I'll steal it, rather than trying to be this Johnny Fab. Johnny Fab is I got that name because someone couldn't pronounce my name, and it caught on, and it caught on to me. I don't use those things for ego or anything like that. I was a counselor, so people tried to find me on social media. I had to change my name. Johnny Fab was the obvious, but I get this elevated status where I don't want it. I want to be John Fabazeski here in my community, and whatever I can do to impact locally. Advocacy for me is in the time I've been in recovery, not just because of me, but because of others in this community that have been inspired, have brought in recovery centers. They have brought in more meetings. There are CRSs. This community has changed over the last 6 years. Do I want to see that happen everywhere? Yes, but I can't do that. It takes more of us to do that.
No, and I think a lot of that is a perfect little metaphor for our recovery at the exact same time. A program, as you were saying, that works in Pennsylvania isn't going to work for, say, McShin and Richmond. Like it'd be great for all these models to be blanket statements, but what works for me and my program isn't going to work for, Susie and Bobby and their program. Right. Bill, did you have something to add there?
Yeah, I just, John was talking about this phone call. COVID-19 hit. And, what we saw happen in our communities across Pennsylvania, and I suspect nationally, is it's a real threat to people in recovery. So we don't do well in isolation and in situations where we don't have purpose and where we lose hope. And neither does the rest of society either. So bringing people together and simply identifying how we could support each other was one of the things that we did. So, John identified a problem in his area, and he came up with a solution, got on a call, and he shared it with people across Pennsylvania. And these are not, I'm not talking about policymakers, I'm talking about people on the ground trying to figure out how to fix things. And the problems, it was community helping community. And here's the thing that a lot of the policymakers don't understand. They think of our care system as this thing that they put money in the top and out come people who have been treated. That is not how any of this works, and I don't think they get that. What we're doing is developing community. Recovery happens in community, and the largest untapped resource that we have in America to address our addiction epidemic is the community. And our policymakers, they may not figure it out, but we have to energize it. And so that's what we're doing here in Pennsylvania, is connecting people. And so if John figures out something and he addresses it, he can share his solution with another community. They can use the parts of it that work. And what they do, they can share with him, and he could use the parts that work. That's what we're doing. And it not only sustains us, it helps our communities.
Yeah, and these local boards like Pro A that I'm pretty sure y'all are both involved on are a lot more likely to see these problems and bring them to each other's attention than these huge policymakers who are like, let's just throw money at it and then everything will fix itself. You guys can actually get together and say, okay, this is working, this isn't working. How do we move from here? Because you can be in the trenches seeing and experimenting what solutions are working and what aren't. So John did have a question earlier. Why do you think Favor failed nationally of funding issues for authentic recovery? I think that kind of answered some of it, Bill. Did you want to touch on that a little more?
Well, I mean, I'm not sure I'd go with failed. I think we have a long way to go. I think part of what's happened, I'd go off on a tangent here on, part of what's happening is all of this money showed up in our care systems, and where the big money came in, the big people who want the big money came in, and so we get pushed to the side. And what happened? Let's just take peer services. Peer services. I'll talk about Pennsylvania. That came from the recovery community. My organization and founders of ARCO identified what peer services should look like to serve our community. We came up with a credential and built it up. The money shows up, and now they're taking people who don't have the proper kind of support or supervision, and they're putting them into situations with this basic education, and it's become over professionalized, but also under supported. So as they're putting people who are over professionalized and under supported into situations, they're running into trouble. And what's happening there is that they blame the recovery community. So if you take somebody with 10 months or a year and a half, and you put them into a situation where they're reversing overdose deaths, and they don't have supervision and they relapse, we're blaming the person. What we need to do is provide support, and we need to start thinking about actually what's happening in the community. And I think what's failed, in my opinion, is we're doing it again. What I mean by that is every time in history, if you go back into the 60s, the reason that I got help in the 80s is because there were people in the 60s that were watching the failed systems. Like people like me would get lobotomies and electroshock therapy, not publicly funded care, or thrown in jail. And so the kind of the hippies said, we need to do something for our community. And back then there was a heroin epidemic, and then it was followed by a methamphetamine epidemic. And they just started providing services, and our system got built out of that. That was the original recovery movement. It failed because we got into the drug war, and also there was a movement to over-professionalize things. And once it got going, they started pushing us all out. They pushed the recovery people out. It started losing its purpose and vision, and then the whole damn thing had to be rebuilt, which is where we came from in the new recovery movement that started in around 1998. I think that's what's failing, is that we're moving it away from recovery, and it's getting to be all these things. I think what's failing is that we're failing to connect with community. And I see John talks about DuPont. He's a guy I deeply respect, and I think here's a guy who's a physician, and what he has done differently than a lot of other schooled people did is that he had the wisdom to actually listen to the recovery community, and most of these people don't. And I think that actually has to do a lot with stigma and negative perceptions about us. I've said a lot.
No, absolutely. And one of those things that I did want to touch on is that, yeah, John has a good point on the block grant dollars.
I agree with John there.
So one of the ways, say, you said in the 90s, we had to completely build the system from the ground up in the recovery communities by, I think, focusing on peer support model a lot more than that over-professionalized, maybe treatment model. I know they're kind of two different things, but peer support works a lot better, in my opinion, and I think the stats show that as well. But now is the time to completely rework governmental, financial, criminal justice, healthcare infrastructure. And one of the ways that that has been brought up is a possible USA flip, in the same way that Portugal has flipped their drug policy into mass decriminalization of substances. Oregon has actually put a bill on the table that voters will be voting on in November that'll decriminalize drugs to simple possession and misdemeanors across the board instead of felonization in Oregon. Is that, Johnny, is that something that is feasible and will work, or what do you think of that?
Well, I think that, just going back a little bit in what you were saying there about peer support,
sure.
And I'll lead into that, is that, I've had the privilege of being able to train recovery coaches. Very early in my recovery, I was asked by Bill and Pro A to be a trainer, which I have found that educating peers is a passion, and I love doing it. And it has led to my career, and now working in a college in a collegiate recovery program, because let's take the outside the box definition with a little gray area with SAMHSA's definition of recovery and saying striving to reach their full potential. We have so much criminalization that criminal records have made it a barrier to education, a very significant barrier to education. But as one that probably doesn't really exist. Some people get a criminal record and think they can't go to college. They think they can't get the money. They think they can't vote. They think they can't do this. They can't do that. Being able to be involved in something that is giving education to those that have had a criminal have had criminal justice involvement or have not, that are just in recovery. Someone once told me that the saddest place on earth is a cemetery. Not because all the people there died, but because of all the dreams that never came true. All of the I wish I could have, all the I wanted to, or I wish I would have. and being able to provide education to those in recovery, I think it is something that is very high, should be very high across the board. We need people in these positions. Criminal records, criminalization has taken the workforce out of the population. I'm a two-time felon on the administration of a college who can't get a job at McDonald's if I went and applied today. That's just ridiculous to me. So do I support something that decriminalizes drugs? I say, just like anything else, you test it in a certain area and you see how it goes. I don't have the smarts to say, yeah, legalize it or decriminalize it. But I just know that criminal records are doing our population, are doing our people no good at all. They are stuck in. I have seen people die. And why I mean that, why I'm saying die, is because they get a small-time job with a criminal record. They start making enough money that they lose their medical assistance. They can't take their Vivitrol anymore, and then they die. That's plain and simple, because they can't get a job because of a criminal record. And that's ridiculous. It's ridiculous to me, and it's killing people on both ends. We have them overdosing, and then we have people getting into recovery and dying just as well, because of the system that's set up to make them fail. I don't know. Maybe I'm overthinking this, but
no, not at all. I think that we get stuck in these loops and these systems.
Yeah.
And one thing that when John and I were talking about this earlier in the week, I think the word decriminalize scares people. It makes it think, okay, well, you're not. So I think the nomenclature that is supposed to be used, and that was on me, is reclassification, defelonize, because just something as small as that, people can grasp on and say, okay, yeah, reclassification, that makes a lot more sense than, it should be a crime to have substances, but I shouldn't be able to put my entire, 5 years ahead of me in jeopardy, and my education, my employment, my license, my childcare, all this sort of stuff, because I was self-medicating a disease or that was induced by trauma a lot of times.
I want to shoot this in there real quick. It's this. Very early on in my recovery, I was introduced to a program called Pennsylvania Pathway to Pardons, which, if I had 5 years in recovery, I could then petition the state parole boards at the governor's office to get a pardon, and my record would be cleared. It would be taken off my record. I had to jump through all these hoops, pay all this money, get all this paperwork, drive down to Harrisburg, put on a dog and pony show, and beg for forgiveness to have this taken off of my life. Defining me. I made a decision a while back to say, I'm not doing that. You can define me by that paperwork, but I'm going to define me by who I am now. And that's hope right there. And I hope that's hope for some people, because I'm not that person. And if I'm defined by what the state says I have done in the past, well, then let them sit there and look at that, because pretty soon there's going to be so many of us with that record that it's not going to matter anymore to them, because what are you going to do? Who are you going to hire? Who are you going to get to do these things? If that makes sense. I'm not doing that anymore. I am not begging for someone to take away what my past is. I'm showing through my future what it is today.
Bill, what do you think?
Yeah, there's some common themes here, and I just want to backtrack a little bit where you talked about recovery services being more effective than treatment services. And I'm a history guy, okay? So when I talk about when I walked into treatment in the 80s, what I got looked a whole lot like peer services. I walked in the door, I was met by a whole lot of recovering persons. There was not a lot of paperwork. I could stay as long as I wanted. They supported and understood me. And they were people in my community that staffed it. That changed. What happened is it got over professionalized. They pushed all the recovering people out. To use the word that John is using on the feed there, they disenfranchised the recovery community. A little earlier in the feed, John is talking about discrimination against recovering communities and not getting the funding. We're talking about the criminalization of addiction. The theme here is punishing us, okay, or pushing us out. What I'm seeing right now is peer services are becoming over professionalized. True story. In the last few weeks, our state has taken away the certification and handed it off to our certification board that will control everything. They will control every single element. It's a private group. They will make a lot of money doing this. They will control, they will expand and make it harder for people to get certification. If they don't want you to provide training, they can ban you. The whole recovery community is no longer involved in the training that came from our recovery community. Our history was wiped out. In another meeting, in another group, I'm sitting there and we're having an argument over the word authentic in the definition of recovery community organization with people who are not in recovery. So, what I'm seeing is they want to professionalize things and push recovering people out again. We're repeating the part of history where we push recovering people out because the mindset is to punish us. Even when they talk about recovery, when it comes from people who don't understand the history and have not lived this, it comes from a very, very different place. And the mindset is that we need more paperwork, more supervision, and it has to be harder for us to go out and help our communities. And all the money goes elsewhere. It goes to universities and hospitals and things like that. And that's what's happening. So I think I see us kind of going backwards right now. And what has to happen is that we have to stick to our guns and identify that essentially what happens in the end is that recovery happens in communities. The people who send people into care are recovering people. The people that meet them when they come back out and support them are recovering people. We are the system of care, and I think that has to be what is focused on. And part of the problem is that we're kind of getting lost in the sauce right now. I'll shut up for a minute.
No, and absolutely, I think a group of people trying to capitalize off of and make laws and policies about the recovery community without having the recovery community having a seat at that table is what I really take away from that. I mean, making laws and regulations about me without even having me get a word in edgewise is just a flawed system. And I think the fact that they are putting forward these certifications without any sort of due diligence and almost monopolizing it is completely fraudulent at the end of the day. I did want to ask about Debbie's question up here. She was asking, Johnny, if you could speak to the importance of family member support for those who are still struggling. And then we'll maybe talk about the most effective and best way to advocate toward the end of the podcast. I would like to talk about the family support piece a little bit, if you could.
Absolutely. I know that, even Pro-A started to get these trainings out, and the family recovery specialists that were taking hold here in Pennsylvania, and we were hoping, moving in a good direction to have funding for family support, having specialists for that. I know that happens in a lot of the recovery community organizations without having a credential. I mean, but you need them now, it seems like. But to speak directly to how to, support families through this, it's community. It's having those connections. It's who do you know? Where do you have these different groups that are there? Recovery support centers there. If you go to these centers, they'll have individuals there that are addressed specifically to the family. My wife is a family recovery specialist. She is, of course, she's got the experience. You put up with my shit for a long time. I wasn't the nicest guy ever, but she actually went out into the community, and she goes out into the community, and she's there 24/7. It doesn't matter if it's 2:00 in the morning and a family member's having a rough time, her phone will ring and she will answer it. These people exist. And if you're a person on this call or watching this and you are a family member, get it out there. Be that person that can help someone else. I'm not talking about doing it on a national platform, but doing it in your community, as we've been talking about all evening. In your community, people or family members that are struggling. It's about reaching out to those that may be in recovery, have gone through it before, have lost someone. These become the best advocates. They're the grassroots. They're the people that are building this foundation. And as Bill said, the ones that we've been kind of left out of the conversation now. Now we're kind of getting pushed to the side. And I'll share this with you to tell you the importance of peers. And I don't do things by reading it in a book or learning. This is my life experience, is I trained the first class of CRSs in Williamsport, Pennsylvania. And there was a young lady there in that class. And this young woman had her hand up every 2 seconds. You know, one of those students that just, every question, wanted to ask 100 questions. And finally I had to stop her to break, and I had to say, can you please write them down and let's talk afterwards so I can get through. This is my first training. You know, and this girl, all of her life been in addiction, finally got in recovery, the minimum amount of time to take the certification, went on to start a warm handoff program in the hospital, went on to be a CRS supervisor in the area, have a whole bunch of CRSs working under her. Here I am 4 years later teaching probably the 4th or 5th class in this town. And there's a 68-year-old woman in that class. And she says, I'm here today because that young girl that I taught those years ago how to be a coach, met her in an emergency room at 3 a.m. after an overdose, and now she's 18 months in recovery and wants to help others just like she did. Now that's hope, that's purpose, that's community, all in a ball right there for you. That's a community doing what they need to do. Generations of now CRS there in that community. So I'm sorry I blabbed too long.
No, not at all. That's beautiful, Bill.
Yeah, that's a great story, and I've had experiences like that too, where there's like a generational thing of recovery where people that I've worked with have gone on to do amazing things, and so we can see the ripple effect of recovery. Just recovery. This is the other thing that communities and policy makers need to understand. Recovery is contagious. So is addiction. I got started with addiction because older kids were around. They didn't want the younger kid to tell on them, so they gave the younger kid some drugs. I liked them. What did I do? Is I took them to school and shared it with all my friends, right? Well, recovery works the same way. When you start talking about recovery and people start seeing it, people start asking you. I deal with those phone calls all the time, and so that people see hope and they're drawn to it. Now, Debbie asked this question about families. Families are often lost, and addiction is still, it's steeped in deep shame in America. So people think that there's something wrong if addiction happens in their family. For anybody out there listening, addiction affects most American families from every single background. There is nothing to be ashamed of. What you need to know is that recovery is a probable outcome if people get connected to care and you stick with it. Now that's harder to do now in America than it should be, but it can happen. And I think what we need to do for families is arm them with knowledge and support. So, you know, if there are family members who get involved in the process because a family member of theirs becomes addicted to drugs, and another family can help navigate them through that and help reduce some of the pain and the shame and connect them in quicker to hope, that actually, there's a parallel recovery in the family, and then the individual is more likely than not going to make it out of the addiction cycle quicker because the family doesn't have to go through all that steep learning curve. And then maybe the other thing that we can do, she also asked about advocacy work. You know, I'm still seen as a drug addict. You know, I might be a drug addict with a 4.0 that I graduated from college from, and I may teach at university, and I may have actually testified in front of the U.S. Senate and helped organize things in my House of Representatives. But you know what? Compared to other people, I'm treated as less than as soon as I open my mouth and say that I'm a person in recovery, because they see us as less than. You know, families actually can sidestep some of that shame and stigma, and sometimes they can talk in ways that we cannot. So, I mean, I think we see family recovery as an important part of this, and not just for well-to-do families, because right now, you know who gets family education and services are wealthy families. We need to see family support across America in every single community, period. And so, you know, that's what we advocate for.
No, absolutely. That's spot on when it comes to the family support piece. The destigmatization was something I was talking about today. Johnny, I actually today and yesterday have been training recovery coaches for the very first time. training other people. So what you said there kind of really hit home. And one of those things that we were talking about was destigmatizing, being able to practice our opening statement, saying, hey, I'm Alex, I'm a person with substance use disorder, the proper language and nomenclature to use so people don't look at me and say, oh, I used to get high, I'm a drug addict, being able to be authentic while being professional and not be seen as these destitute type people that people already want to judge us and label us as. Were you going to say something, Johnny?
Well, what I was going to say was about advocacy locally is find your allies, find people that are similar. Start asset mapping. And what I mean by asset mapping is who is in your corner, who supports what you're doing, who's working with that. Gather together, get groups, meet a few times before you create actions. You want to change the world, but what actually do you want to change? Being able to actually find some common ground on what it is that you want to change is great, because we want to change things in our community. What do you want to change? Oh, I don't know, but we want to change this. Being an advocate is kind of like I think, I'm sorry, Bill, I'm throwing you under the bus. First year working as a CRS, I called Bill. I was having the roughest day of my professional life, if you could call it that. And he said, he didn't give me a solution. He just said, some days it's like being in the middle of the ocean in a rowboat during a hurricane with one oar. And I remember that, because that's what it is. For everything that we lose, we win maybe once or twice and things happen, but it's about celebrating those little victories every once in a while. But for me, it's about seeing someone's life change. And I don't have all the answers when it comes to what do we do as a nation. I wish I did, but I know in my community that I'm part of a group of people that can create change. And if we replicate that across the country, wow, 25 million of us in recovery. What is this? Another 25 million that are suffering? John told this story at Rally in the Valley about the, Alex's eyes rolled. He probably knows the story.
Oh, I didn't know. My eyes didn't roll.
It's about, John Chin also told about I listen to these stories. I listen to these things when people say things, and I pay attention to it, and they resonate with me. Is about hurricanes in Virginia. They're a lot different than what we have in Pennsylvania. And of course, I can't talk like John. I can't say it that way, so I'll try to do the best I can. But he says there's a little boy out on the beach, and after a hurricane, all these starfish wash up. And after a few seconds, the starfish is in the beach. You know what happens to it, right? It dries right out. So there's a boy throwing starfish back. Another kid walks down, says to him, he says, "What are you doing?" He says, "I'm throwing these starfish back." He says, "Well, you dummy, you can't save them all." He says, "Yeah, but I can save this one and this one. And if you help me, we can save more." That stayed with me. That story he told at Rally in the Valley, meeting him there, stayed with me. Because it's things like this. I don't know. I spend time with Bill. It's like being with a guru. I listen to his words, and they'll come back up in my life, and he'll be like, "What? I said that?" But I listen to these things. Listening, that's because they're trying to be stewards. John is a steward. Bill is a steward. They're trying to help us in some way. I'm old. I'm new to recovery in the movement, but I'm 49 years old, man. I'm not gonna. Johnny Fab is going to be old Johnny Fab very soon, and I just hope that some of the individuals I've been able to impact in my short time in recovery have caught some of those values to be able to change their community. If that makes sense, Alex. And I didn't mean to go on a rant there.
No, absolutely. I think doing stuff like this, if it at least affects and helps one person, then it's totally worth it at the end of the day. That's not even a question in my opinion. I did want to ask. Bill, so one of these other things that I think we can do in the community as a larger, I know we were talking about the 5-year paradigm once we get into recovery, but I would like to talk about the stuff before. Harm reduction and prevention. What are some of the stuff that we could do there to attack and get at this disease before it gets to the point where we are completely desperately seeking recovery?
Well, let's start with young. Addiction often starts in the young, and we ignore it as a society until it's like it's a little fire in the kitchen, like the pan has a fire in it, but we ignore it until the house is on fire. And that's actually how we deal with addiction. Like after we wait until after people go through an arrest cycle, when we could see it starting at 12 and 13 and 14. And one of the things that we need to do is get in early, and not just for everybody's families, not just for white people. What we're doing now is we'll send black kids to jail. And so we need to get in and get people services early. And harm reduction is important. Things like Narcan and clean syringes and education and engaging people. By the way, that's a recovery model. Doing 12-step calls and meeting with people was in a form of harm reduction. Actually, is that you're providing education. You're showing people there's a better way, and we need to do that. I love people with addiction. I've had them in my. I've lost family members. I've lost more friends to this than every other thing combined. And I want them to survive and live and have the opportunity to have the same thing that I do. And that starts by getting education out to them, showing them that there's hope, reducing the spread of disease, reversing death, and getting services earlier than we do for everybody, not just wealthy kids. And I think if we do that, we can take 25 million Americans and we could call that a good start. To where we could go,
and something as simple as maybe not in every county, but I think something as simple as this, maybe not simple, but anything as good and successful as recovery high schools have kind of been, is something that is a totally viable option. Johnny, have you seen that work? Has Pennsylvania been working on recovery high schools, or what's kind of your experience with that? Because it's kind of a bit of a divisive topic. I've seen, Michigan did one that was successful until they ran out of money, essentially, because it is a self-sufficient thing. Is there a possibility to make state-funded recovery high schools, or are we a while away from that? What do you think?
Well, I think we're a long while away from that, but I know we have two recovery high schools in Pennsylvania, the Bridgeway and Archway School. Am I correct, Bill? Is the other the Archway?
The Bridgeway and the Colby Academy. There's
Colby Academy. Sorry.
So can I just say, so here in PA, it's an interesting story. It's a little, my state senator who lives actually in the next block over from me, and a representative passed a bill to fund 4 recovery high schools, and it passed, but the money was not allocated to do that, and then there was a bureaucratic fight over whose budget it would come out of, so it didn't get funded. Eventually, some of the funding went to one of those 2 high schools, and the second one is a Catholic high school. It's the first one like it, recovery high school. It's the first one like it in the country, and it looks like they're doing great things. But if we had recovery high schools in every region of the state, we could actually change things so much, because there would be young people like me who are getting in trouble who could get an opportunity to get in recovery. And the other thing it would do is normalize recovery and show the rest of the kids that you don't always have to get high, that you could actually have fun as a kid and not get high. And those are powerful lessons.
And as 2 gentlemen who work as professors or in colleges, it's another opportunity for us to employ peers in an environment where they are then empowered to educate other people and empower them. So it works on a 2-way street. When you're hiring these teachers who are teaching kids, you don't have to go through what I went through to get in this scenario. So I personally think recovery high schools are a great idea, but as Bill said, just because it passes doesn't mean that they can't find some sort of loophole financially to make sure that it doesn't work out, or I don't know, whatever excuse that they want to bring in. I mean, John had a good point that a lot of it's just, well, I think the exact thing that he said was bureaucrats are appointed by politicians who are funded by special interests. So I think that's practically cynical, and recovery high schools threaten education leaders. So, especially with the coronavirus going on nowadays, how has that kind of affected your advocacy work, Bill? You mentioned earlier that you guys have been meeting weekly to see exactly how the community has been affected by it. I was wondering exactly how those discussions have been going.
Well, I mean, I think it's helpful to do, and I think one of the greatest stories of the COVID-19 crisis, whether or not it'll be told or not, is how many people jumped to action and put whatever kind of thing that they could online, and it happened overnight, and it happened by grassroots people just making it happen. I mean, I'm concerned. I'm concerned about some of the longer term trends, and I'm concerned that we may lose the focus on addiction. But I think that model of helping each other, somebody wiser than me said that he got involved in service because he's either going to help people or he's going to hurt people. And for people with addiction, that you understand what I mean by that. You're either doing service or you're not doing service, and you're probably heading backwards to a place that's not good. So I think we have to watch that. I want to steal. I know you're coming towards the end of the show. We
can go on as long as we want, honestly.
Oh, cool. Okay. Well, I can wait for this if John wants to answer that.
Well,
no, if we want to switch around, I love a nice fluid dialogue and organic. If you had something on the brain, Bill.
Well, it was what I wrote down, and like I said, I'm a history person. I think we have to understand where we came from to understand where we are, and then figure out where we want to go. And so we're 19 years past St. Paul, and for people who don't know, the recovery community 19 years ago, got together in St. Paul, Minnesota, to come up with what's called the new advocacy movement. And this is, John, what I wrote down. They came up with three things back 19 years ago that they thought should occur in the recovery movement. One is to celebrate and honor recovery in all its diversity. So they had diversity in the first objective there. That this means every community, not just some communities, but recovery in every community's recovery in all its diversity. Number two, focus advocacy skills for the recovery movement. So help us become advocates. So local, regional, statewide, federal. And advocacy is a word that concerns people nowadays. Advocacy is not the same as lobbying. Advocacy, you can be lobbyist, but advocacy is educating and sort of making sure people understand what the problem is. And number three, produce principles, language, strategies, and leaderships to carry the mission forward. In other words, sustain the thing, because if we're not careful, movements end. So we're 19 years into this, and what I would ask people to do, we all have a role in this. What do we want it to say 19 years from now or 20 years from now? And I think that's really going to be up to us. I think that they were visionary, and I think we've done some of these things, and some of the stuff we may have moved off bubble on, but we should be figuring out where do we want it to go over the next 20 years, and how we can build on that. And I think I would like people thinking about that.
Absolutely. Johnny, do you got any bright ideas? How do we do that?
Well, I just want to backstep again to, you were talking about recovery high schools. And I think John just said something very important, is stigma still dangerously high? Absolutely. In rural communities up here, if I was to mention a recovery high school, I would probably get driven off the property with pitchforks. The stigma of drug use or alcohol use is still of a moral failing rather than an illness. But I'll tell you that, how do you combat that? That's probably the $15 billion question, is how do we combat stigma? I think there was a quote once that I heard: chasing stigma is like chasing smoke. It's hard to capture. But I was, as Bill said, one of those key points was education through advocacy, not just at like going to a legislator, but through education. And I think that having the opportunity to go in and speak to a regular high school, middle school and high school in rural Pennsylvania, every grade, 6 through 12, I had the opportunity. I wanted each one of those grades by themselves. I didn't want them all in the auditorium. I didn't want all the kids in there. I wanted one grade at a time. It was a daunting task. It took all day. But I sent a survey the day before or the week before that said, how has drugs and alcohol negatively impacted your life? What questions do you have about drugs and alcohol?
We'll get a fraction of that.
The survey was incredible. The school thought they didn't have a problem with drugs and alcohol with the parents or with the students. It was overwhelming. I was called in. They were going to bring the police in because some of the surveys had my dad beats me when he drinks. I lost my sister to an overdose. This school was completely shocked that it was even there. And as they brought me in to do these speeches, and at the beginning of the speech, I asked each one of the students if addiction was a choice or an illness. And it was overwhelmingly that it was a choice. Mm-hmm. By the end of that seminar, by the end of the assembly, I asked the question once again, and it had significantly changed the title just by educating and providing my story, my experience, my life, and what's happened with me. And that's the education piece. I think we need more of that, Bill. I think that we get lost in this, like, we got to change the language. We can't say this. We can't say that. We need to get more grassroots, more boots on the ground, and get into these communities and have these conversations that don't want to have the conversations because they have a problem. They're just too ashamed to admit it or embarrassed to admit it.
I think that's a great point because just real quick, I think it's going to be a lot easier to spend an hour to change a sixth grader's mind than it is to spend an hour to change a 55-year-old man's mind. You know what I'm saying? That's already going to be rooted in their ways. It makes a lot more sense to reach forward to newer and younger generations with more plasticity. And just in general, I think future generations are, dealing with, are more politically correct and forthright and open-minded in general, I think. Bill, did you have something?
Yeah, I think that stigma is a really critical element of what's occurring, and stigma is about those people. When you're thinking about those people, you're stigmatizing that group because you're looking at another group. And the reality about addiction in America is that it's every people, and so when you're looking at your people, and I've talked to so many people, and they'll start talking to me and they'll say their family member has an addiction problem, but they're not like those people, and I have to say to them, what? Actually, they're exactly like those people, mm-hmm. because it's such a common story that our people are those people. And so changing stigma is simply about changing the concept of those people to our people. And so we have to get this close to individuals and educate them. So I went back to my high school reunion, and when people ask what you do, and I told them what I do, some of the people there that started talking to me about addiction within their own families, like, we didn't hide it well, so you could pretty clearly tell I had a drug and alcohol problem growing up, but kids, some families were a lot better, and I realized that it was happening in their families too, and by talking about what happened in my family, I gave them permission to talk about what happens in their family. And the more we give permission to each other to identify like that, we can change America one family and one community at a time.
Yeah, and I think something that Johnny mentioned, advocates are educators at the end of the day. Everyone, and kind of as you're saying, Bill, is just because I'm advocating on behalf of something, one, doesn't mean I'm a lobbyist and I'm being paid by a special interest to advocate on behalf of substance use disorder and those affected by it. I literally could just be spreading awareness and educating others on it, just in more of a political sphere and capacity. So I think that is very important. And I like how you mentioned the more open I am about my recovery, the more other people are going to be susceptible to think, okay, well, he's, on Facebook Live with his, his little brother in the background, and he seems pretty open about it, so that maybe I'm not as bad of a guy as I think I am. I'm not a criminal. I think a lot of times people are over stigmatized as, I have a record because of my drug use, so I am a criminal because of that. Johnny, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, a great thing to read is Brene Brown, The Power of Vulnerability.
Vulnerability, absolutely.
Is, I had to become comfortable being uncomfortable. And again, I was privileged enough early in my recovery to fall into, sort of the understanding, besides just folding chairs and making coffee, I thought there was a world of recovery out there. And, luckily, a gentleman who I respect very much, Mr. Michael Donahue, was very nice enough to say I should be a certified recovery specialist. And I was like, what's that? And then I got kind of turned on to this understanding of, hey, maybe we should have a sober movie in our community. What? We're going to do what? A sober movie? Who's going to come to that? We showed a movie in our community. It was The Addams Family. It's like 20 years old, and we made it a free movie,
Classic.
Free soda and popcorn, and we filled the theater. And then my son, I think just about everything that I do is because of him. The night that I was arrested, he had hidden my keys from me, wouldn't let me leave the house, and he gave them back. I told him I'd be back soon, knowing full well that I wasn't. And the whole time that I was in jail, he came to visit me, and he said, "Dad, I'm sorry." He has special needs, and I didn't think about it at all, man. But if I would have succeeded that night, that kid would have had to live the rest of his life thinking that he had done it to me. And every day that I get now, I hit my knees every morning, and I thank God for the strength. I ask God for the strength to get through the day without a drink or a drug, because all I want to do is just help other people. He asked me, he said, "Dad, his friends were dying. His friends are dying in school. What can we do?" And we started a chapter of young people in recovery in the area some years ago, and that has morphed now. Done a lot of good things in our community with it, and moved on some great people in that organization, and to what we're doing with the Recovery Advocacy Project now, and ProA is just, they're part of my life. Do you know what I mean? It's not, this for me isn't just about being involved. I've made recovery sort of my life, if that makes sense, because it's that important to me. And when I say things like we do recover, I mean it, because we do. But Bill helps me remember that we do recover together, because without you guys, none of this shit's worth it at all. At the end of the day, I just want to make sure that I'm paying it back what was so freely given to me.
No, that's beautiful, man, because I think the through line of this is the sense of everything is a lot easier and more likely to succeed on a community level, on a grassroots level. If it's just me and you, this in general just feels like I'm having a conversation with two buddies I've known for years. So I think that is a lot more likely to happen when you have three people who are in recovery who just know what we dealt with at the end of the day. It's something really intangible that maybe those in recovery can't understand. And we deserve a seat at that table when they're having discussions about us. That's pretty much my thoughts on it. Bill, anything else? Any cool things coming up? Any final thoughts? We've covered a lot of ground, and I'll be honest, I could go on for another 20 minutes. This has been absolutely delightful.
Well, I just listening to the things that you guys were talking about, I totally agree. Like there's a community element of recovery, and there's a connection between us all. That's the spark that makes it all happen. And the difference between me and somebody who's got 10 months is simply that I've been doing this longer. That's all. And I've had great people that help me. And so my role is to pass on what those people did for me to the next generation, because ultimately speaking, this is what actually works. At the end of the day, the recovery community has always taken care of itself. These other entities have ultimately, sometimes they've helped, oftentimes they don't. And so we have to keep the community alive and support each other. And that's that's why it's an honor to be on your show and be involved with you guys. Thanks very much for having us.
Oh, absolutely. It's been a pleasure. Johnny, any final thoughts? You're gonna make a TikTok about this today? Tell people what that is.
I just want to say that, the TikToks were a coping mechanism. What I mean by that is during COVID, I didn't have a purpose. I didn't have a connection, and I was losing my circle of community. We were isolated. It was actually Bill that helped me a lot through that, helped me and my family through that. And you know what? I started making TikToks, and then I started getting messages. I started getting messages from people. They're like, "Thank you so much." Me and my wife and my kids sat down and watched all of them, and it got us through. It helped us, and now I try to do it. I don't know. I'm not trying to be a star or nothing. I'm just trying to make people feel a little bit better in a world that's not so good right now, and the final thought, I could say anything. It's on my email. It's on my slogan. It's in my car. It says, somebody should do something about that. You are someone. Do something. Thanks for having us, Alex.
That's beautiful stuff, man. I really appreciate having you guys on. We'll have to do this again in the future. I know Todd's got your information. You guys are inspirational. I've learned a lot. Hopefully a lot of other people have, and hopefully we can affect our communities on a grassroots level in general. And y'all just keep up the great work, gentlemen. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alex.
All right. Have a good night, everyone. Signing off.
Bye.
One thing we do here, we always educate our participants. I want you to leave here after your 30, 60, 90 days, or however long you stay and leave. I want you to be educated about the disease of addiction, about substance use disorders, what you need to do to personally recover. But I want you to know why we don't have the support we should have. I want you to know where all the funding goes, what the thinking is of our culture, why we're the way we are. And just for the record, everybody put their right hand up. I hereby deputize each and every one of you as an ambassador to be a face and voice of recovery from here on out. You've just been deputized. You just became ambassadors of a recovery movement, an authentic recovery movement. What authentic means is by people in recovery themselves. This is our call to action.
I'm tired of waiting, lost while I'm sitting at home. Dream of a new destination, lust for something unknown. Oh, you better leave it alone. And I'd rather get up and go. How long can I lie around waiting for it? Sometimes you gotta walk out the door. No ceiling, no crown, no pressure gonna hold me down. No stopping till I break every rule. No limits to what I can do. Nowhere is too far away. No border gonna stand in my way. No wall that I can't break through. No limits to what I can do.